For those of us who covered the Kent State tragedy on that warm spring day, the passage of 20 years has done little to bring new perspective to the final legacy of the most violent decade in American history. Being there did not give us some kind of unique insight into how the unthinkable could happen. The best we can do is recall, reflect, and learn from one of America's darkest hours. News Center 8's Don Olson looks back at what led to those 13 out-of-control seconds in which the festering fury of Vietnam exploded in Middle America.
Night riders and the vigilantes are the worst type of people that we harbor in America.
But is that any reason to shoot and kill people because they're throwing stones or they're chanting?
Could I have done something different? Could I have stopped it?
When troops from the Ohio National Guard opened fire, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others, many historians consider it the beginning of the end of not only the Nixon administration, but the war in Vietnam. And it happened on the most mundane place in American society, a parking lot at a generally unknown Midwestern campus, Kent State. Dean Kaler's spine was shattered by a bullet that early afternoon. He is the most seriously injured of the wounded students.
I think of, obviously, the 4 students who were shot at Kent, Allison and Sandra and Jeffrey and Bill. Then the second thing that I think of that comes to my mind is the injustice and the travesty of power and the abuse of power that our elected officials exerted that day and the weeks preceding the shootings at Kent.
Dr. Jerry M. Lewis, a sociology professor, not only witnessed the shootings, but was nearly shot himself.
Kent State is about the use of force in a democracy, and that's what it's about. We need to inquire, learn, and reflect about how the kind of force that is used, how it's used, the consequences of that force.
The National Guard had been called in 3 days earlier to aid local authorities in coping with anti-war demonstrations in the wake of America's invasion of Cambodia. The ROTC building was burned to the ground on the evening of May 2nd.
Leave this area immediately.
With orders to disperse any student gathering, the Guard, with fixed bayonets and loaded rifles, began moving across the Commons area, firing tear gas canisters along the way. At 12:24 p.m., 28 guardsmen fired 61 shots. 4 students, Allison Krause, William Schroeder, Sandra Schroyer, and Jeffrey Miller, lay dying in a parking lot.
There's people dying down there. Get ambulance up here.
And in a time span of 13 seconds, a controversy was born that continues to burn 20 years later.
I could see 3 kids laying in the driveway down there with blood, and their girlfriends were standing over and crying and everything.
Brigadier General Robert Canterbury was the Guard's ranking officer.
Our people felt that their lives were in danger, which in fact was the case.
I don't think they did anything in my mind that I've ever seen that was wrong.
Colonel Charles Fassinger was in command of the troops that fired. He says to this day the Guardsmen feel repercussions from May 4th. Years of litigation and what was written in the media tore many families apart. Many of the Guardsmen were looking down the barrel of a gun at students not much younger than themselves.
There were certainly 4 families affected, but there were lots of other families affected. There were 100 and some Guard families affected. The school was affected. The state, the nation, everybody was affected by what happened.
The students also continue to feel the effects of May 4th. They were characterized as unpatriotic hippies who deserved everything they got.
I was nothing more than a troublemaker, and that other students were as well, and that we weren't being very respectful of our government.
As for the university, enrollment declined over the years as the school suffered an image problem. To some Kent students who were just toddlers when the shootings occurred, May 4th was something to forget.
You know, we've got a lot more going for us than May 4th, 1970. And plus, you know, how many people are here from 15 years ago?
Controversy returned to campus in 1977. Demonstrators erected a tent city protesting the university's decision to construct a gym near the site of the shootings. After efforts to move the gym failed, protesters tore down fences and marched on the construction site. In July, 192 were arrested for defying a court order to disperse. Who is to blame for the events of May 4th? Was it Governor Jim Rhodes, who vowed to keep the university open at any cost, and who many thought laid the groundwork for violence with inflammatory remarks at a news conference on May 3rd?
These people just move from one campus to the other and terrorize the community. They're worse than the brown shirts and the communist element, and also the night riders and the vigilantes. They're the worst type of people that we harbor in America.
Was it General Canterbury who ordered his troops to break up what some people called a peaceful rally? Or the students who failed to disperse despite repeated warnings by the authorities? Or was it the unrest created by a restless society growing more and more frustrated over a war that seemed as though it would never end?
I don't think students know much about
Kaler,
that.
who now ironically is a member of the establishment himself, a commissioner in Athens County, says at first he was bitter, but now feels nothing but forgiveness for whomever pulled the trigger, paralyzing him for life.
If I harbored that bitterness and anger, I'd probably be very unproductive and very unuseful human being in society, and I didn't want to do that.
Colonel Fassinger, now a businessman in Cleveland, doesn't like to talk about what happened at Kent State, but as commanding officer holds himself responsible for the actions of his men 20 years ago.
The reason I talked at all is that somebody has to tell the guard side. And I take that responsibility as having been the commander. I guess that's my job.
20 years after the shootings, the controversy surrounding Kent State continues. Perhaps it will take another generation for society to objectively look at what happened here and pass judgment for generations to come.
We've had bloodshed. It's a terrible thing that's happened here today. This campus will never forget it. But don't start chasing across